24 years ago, a 17-year-old high school student named Jessica Harper vanished after leaving the library in Harrisonville, Missouri, leaving behind her abandoned car by a lake with a few strange bloodstains. Police suspected her ex-boyfriend and a gym teacher who was once close to her, but with no body found and faint clues, the investigation quickly hit a dead end. Yet, over all those years, Jessica's parents never gave up hope, clinging to the fragile belief that the truth would eventually be uncovered. Then one day, a chance discovery in the woods revealed a critical detail overlooked for nearly 2 decades, a detail that would change the entire case and shock the Missouri community in ways no one could have imagined. Before diving into this chilling story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy the video, don't forget to hit subscribe. On September 14, 2001, Harrisonville, Missouri, still carried the charm of a peaceful small town where people greeted each other on Main Street. The corner grocery store was still run by a family across generations, and the town's central church rang its bells faithfully every Sunday morning. It was a community where people believed they knew each other well, where kids could ride bikes down the streets without worry, and doors were rarely locked during the day. In that tranquil setting, the name Jessica Harper was familiar to many. The 17-year-old, the only daughter of Linda and Robert Harper, was praised by teachers for her diligence and loved by friends for her gentle nature. Always ready to lend a hand, Jessica had long brown hair, bright eyes, and a radiant smile, often appearing at Cass County High School events as a model student. Her dream was to become a nurse after graduation, a plan that filled her parents with pride. That Friday evening, Jessica attended a study group at the Cass County Public Library. The session ran longer than expected as her friends studied and chatted. As the clock neared 9:30 p.m., they began packing up their books. One of her close friends noticed Jessica seemed uneasy, her eyes darting around the room as if scanning for something. When asked, Jessica whispered that lately she'd felt like someone was following her when she walked home late. Her friend shivered, but brushed it off, and the group reassured her. It was probably just the dark and school stress playing tricks on her mind. They left the library together, exchanging a few laughs to shake off the odd atmosphere. But as Jessica stood alone by the glass door, waiting for the others to leave first, her smile faded, replaced by an indescribable unease. Security cameras mounted high captured Jessica walking out to the parking lot at 9:45 p.m. The sparse streetlights cast a faint yellow glow on the damp ground, still wet from an afternoon shower, creating patchy reflections. The lot was nearly empty, with only a few cars sitting silently in the dark, their surfaces reflecting light like cold, unblinking eyes. Jessica clutched her backpack to her chest, hurrying toward her green Chevy Cavalier. She glanced left, then right, and suddenly looked back, as if checking if someone was following her. The empty space made each footstep echo, blending with the chirping of crickets and the whistle of wind through the trees by the lake. The last recorded image showed Jessica's small figure fading into the shadows. The library's glass door slammed shut behind her, leaving an eerie silence. Mere seconds later, her figure vanished from the frame, as if the night had swallowed the young girl whole. And from that moment on, no one saw Jessica return. The next morning, as the sun rose over the trees in Harrisonville, a man fishing early at Blue Springs Lake, about 15 miles from the library, noticed a lone car in an empty parking lot. The dark green Chevy Cavalier had its driver's side door slightly ajar, with a backpack faintly visible on the back seat. He stopped to look, called out a few times, but no one answered, and no one was around. Sensing something was wrong, he quickly dialed 911. When officers from the Cass County Sheriff's Office arrived, they immediately set up yellow tape around the area, pushing back curious onlookers. The scene felt unsettlingly strange. The car showed no signs of being tampered with, the keys still in the ignition, as if the owner had stepped out for just a moment and never returned. But that neatness was shattered by a chilling detail. A forensic technician leaned close to the gear shift and spotted a small blood stain, no bigger than a fingertip, dried on the plastic surface. It wasn't noticeable to the average person, but to investigators, it could be the most critical piece of evidence. On the back seat, Jessica's familiar backpack remained, filled with books, neatly written notes, and the colored pencils she used to mark them. This confirmed she left the library with no intention of going far. Yet her wallet and the Nokia phone her friends often saw her with were completely gone. This discrepancy baffled the police. If this was a robbery, why would the perpetrator leave the car and a backpack full of books? If Jessica left willingly, why abandon her car and belongings in an empty lot? Every question led to a dead end. While searching the glove compartment, police found another strange discovery. A neatly folded piece of paper. When opened, it revealed 4 words written in blue ink. "See you soon." The handwriting was soft and rounded, very different from Jessica's sharp, clear script. This vague message immediately sparked new theories. Did Jessica have a planned meeting at Blue Springs Lake? Did she trust someone enough to leave her car and go with them? Or was this note deliberately left to throw off the entire investigation? Meanwhile, the Harper family was notified and rushed to the scene. Linda Harper stood frozen behind the tape, her eyes wide as she saw her daughter's backpack placed into a clear evidence bag. She broke into sobs, her trembling hands clutching her husband's arm. Robert tried to stay composed, but his bloodshot eyes betrayed him as he said hoarsely, "She would never leave her wallet and phone behind. Jessica would never do that." His words were a firm rejection of any theory that she had run away. Technicians continued their thorough search. They found a few stray hairs on the back seat, their owner still unidentified. Muddy smudges on the car floor suggested a second person had been inside, but the shoe prints were too blurred to determine size or style. Everything seemed designed to obscure the truth. By noon, the Cavalier was towed to the station for further analysis. The image of the small green car being lifted, reflecting the flashing red police lights, became a haunting scene that left onlookers speechless. News spread quickly through the town. Jessica's car was found abandoned by the lake, with blood inside, her backpack left behind, but her wallet and phone missing, along with a mysterious note. Townsfolk began buzzing with speculation. Some believed Jessica had met with her ex-boyfriend. Others thought a close female friend had lured her away, but no one could ignore the most terrifying details. The blood stain on the gear shift and the note reading, "See you soon." Those clues hinted at a truth no one wanted to face, that Jessica had gone to meet someone that final night, and that meeting may have sealed her fate. This obsession spread beyond Harrisonville, and within 24 hours, the entire Missouri community was jolted awake by the shock. People accustomed to calm flooded the police station, signing up to volunteer in the search. Hundreds, from farmers to shop clerks to high school students, lined up, determined to help bring Jessica back. The Cass County Sheriff's Office quickly coordinated with local rescue teams, launching an unprecedented search operation. Helicopters circled above, their spotlights cutting through the dense trees around Blue Springs Lake. On the ground, volunteer groups split up, armed with flashlights, sticks, and maps, combing every bush and lakeshore. On the water, small boats were deployed, and divers with oxygen tanks plunged into suspicious areas. Meanwhile, K-9 units were brought in, their noses pressed to the ground, barking and charging after Jessica's lingering scent. The scene was both chaotic and tense, like a giant net trying to trap the final clue. At first, everyone was hopeful. One group found dark fabric scraps under a tree, but tests showed they were just an old discarded shirt. Another group dug through leaf piles, finding nothing but trash. As time passed, the initial urgency gave way to heaviness. Then, the K-9 unit suddenly reacted strongly. After sniffing Jessica's backpack, the dogs bolted, leading straight through the parking lot and along a narrow dirt path behind the lake. Their frantic barking made hearts race. Everyone followed, running and calling Jessica's name. The path stretched nearly a mile, then abruptly led to an old wooden fence surrounding the backyard of a familiar town family, the Wilcoxes. The crowd froze. Everyone knew the Wilcoxes, a kind family, regular churchgoers with an older son in Jessica's class. The dogs sniffed around the yard, pawing under trees and near the porch, but then stopped. They sniffed again, barked briefly, and lost the scent. No further reaction. The trainers had the dogs smell the backpack again, but the result was the same. The trail ended in the Wilcoxes' backyard. The atmosphere grew strangely tense. Volunteers whispered to each other, their eyes sneaking toward the house's windows, where a curtain seemed to twitch, as if someone was watching. An officer knocked, and Mr. Wilcox stepped out, his voice shaky but firm. "We don't know anything. You can check." Police conducted a brief search, finding nothing unusual beyond a vegetable garden and gardening tools. But the image of the dogs losing the scent there planted a seed of doubt in the community that wouldn't easily fade. That evening, as the search paused due to darkness, Harrisonville residents gathered at the small diner near the town square. Anxious whispers filled the air. Some insisted the Wilcoxes were hiding something, while others dismissed it as coincidence. But everyone had to admit one truth. If the dogs had picked up Jessica's scent, she had at least passed through that backyard at some point. The tension spread through the town, shattering the trust between neighbors. People began eyeing each other warily, wondering if the person involved in Jessica's disappearance was living among them. Attending prayer services, shaking hands as if nothing had happened. And that suspicion turned Harrisonville from a peaceful town into a place where every glance carried a question: who among us knows more than they're admitting? The suspicion around the Wilcoxes' backyard hadn't even settled when the Cass County Sheriff's Office shifted focus to a far more familiar name. Kyle Henderson, Jessica's ex-boyfriend. Kyle, 18, tall and impulsive, had dated Jessica for over 6 months before their breakup. Friends recalled their relationship ending messily, with long arguments. Even one instance of Jessica crying in the school hallway. Coincidentally, just days before her disappearance, the two had a heated argument about Jessica wanting to cut off contact completely. This immediately made Kyle the top suspect. When called in for questioning, Kyle showed up with a bandage on his right hand, explaining he'd scratched it while fixing his old pickup truck. Police noted his statement but grew suspicious, as the long, deep scratches looked more like defensive wounds than a mechanical accident. One officer asked bluntly, "Did Jessica cause those marks while fighting back?" Kyle angrily denied it, insisting he was home all night on September 14th, playing online games with friends. To verify, police asked for his account and login times. At first, his story seemed solid. His account was indeed online around 10 p.m., matching the time Jessica left the library. But when the tech team dug deeper, a discrepancy emerged. The login and chat logs didn't align with Kyle's claims, suggesting someone else had used his account. When pressed, Kyle stammered, blurting out, "My friend logged in for me." This explanation instantly turned his alibi into incriminating evidence in the eyes of the public. Leaked news fueled whispers that Kyle had fabricated an alibi. Even friends who once defended him hesitated, no longer certain of his innocence. At Cass County High School, hallways buzzed with gossip. Kyle made her go. With that temper, who knows? Public pressure hounded Kyle like a wolf scenting blood. Even the Harpers, in their desperation, couldn't help but suspect him. In a brief interview with a local station, Linda Harper said she couldn't rule out any possibilities, even those close to Jessica. Robert was quieter, but his eyes flashed with restrained anger when Kyle's name came up. Police put Kyle under surveillance for days, hoping he'd slip up. They seized his clothes, searched his truck for blood or hair matching the scene, but found nothing. No DNA, no blood beyond the scratches on his hand. The case grew murkier when one of Kyle's close friends admitted to borrowing his account to log into the game that night, unknowingly creating a false alibi. He had no idea Kyle was under investigation. This revelation frustrated and alerted police. Kyle had lied about being online, but was that enough to convict him, or was it just the clumsiness of a panicked teen under suspicion? While police lacked concrete evidence to charge him, The public had nearly convicted Kyle. Local papers described him as the hot-tempered boyfriend and the last person with a clear motive. A photo of Kyle leaving the sheriff's office with his bandaged hand made the front page, sparking a wave of outrage. At the town diner, people whispered that it had to be Kyle, that Jessica had fought back, that the blood on the gear shift was hers. The tension isolated the Henderson family. Kyle's mother avoided the grocery store to escape judgmental stares, and his father kept the garage door shut, dodging all contact. In that atmosphere, Kyle, once a popular high school football player, became synonymous with a crime. Yet, the truth remained elusive. No one expected the case would take even more unexpected turns, and Kyle, despite the heavy suspicion, was not yet the final piece of the dark puzzle surrounding Jessica Harper's disappearance. As the pressure on Kyle Henderson began to ease due to a lack of direct evidence, the Cass County Sheriff's Office was forced to broaden their suspect pool. The next name to come under scrutiny shocked the entire town of Harrisonville: Coach David Miller, the 35-year-old gym teacher at Cass County High School. To many parents, Miller was the picture of friendliness, always on the basketball court with a bright smile, staying late to coach students. But beneath that facade, rumors had long simmered. Miller often gave female students rides home, especially those leaving school late. Some students saw it as kindness, others whispered that he didn't always keep appropriate boundaries. The rumors remained just that, until footage from an ATM near Blue Springs Lake, where Jessica's Chevy Cavalier was found, showed Miller withdrawing cash at exactly 10:15 p.m., just 30 minutes after Jessica vanished from the library's camera. His presence near the crime scene at such a critical time ignited immediate suspicion. When summoned, Miller calmly explained he withdrew money to get gas for his Ford Taurus, then headed home. His voice was steady, his gaze direct, as if he had nothing to hide. But investigators weren't easily convinced. They quickly obtained receipts from the gas station Miller claimed to have visited. The receipt showed a transaction at 11:05 p.m., nearly an hour later than his ATM appearance. An unaccounted-for gap in time emerged, exposing contradictions in Miller's story. When pressed, he faltered briefly, then gave vague answers, saying he might have stopped somewhere to make a call, or sat in his car, thinking for a few minutes. But with a teenage girl missing, a 1-hour gap couldn't be dismissed lightly. Students began sharing stories with police about rides from Miller. One girl said she rode with him after practice, and he asked too many personal questions on the way home. Another recalled him offering to be called if you ever need a ride home late. Though no one claimed he crossed a clear line, combined with his suspicious timing, the once friendly coach's image grew questionable in the community's eyes. The news spread like wildfire. Local papers ran headlines: Coach Miller, basketball hero or hidden threat. Parents whispered over morning coffee that maybe we trusted him too much. Some male students, who once idolized Miller, began to see him differently, as police returned to the school for further questioning. The Harper family, hearing the news, felt their hearts tighten. Linda Harper was stunned, recalling how she'd seen Miller drive Jessica home after practice, thinking nothing of it at the time. Now, that memory stabbed at her. Could the last person with her daughter have been the teacher the whole school trusted? Police dug deeper, checking Miller's phone records from that night. The results showed no calls made between 10:15 and 11:05, the period he claimed he stopped to call. The picture grew murkier. Investigators searched Miller's home and car. In his garage, they found a freshly opened bottle of industrial cleaner, its sharp smell lingering. In the back seat of his Taurus, they discovered a few long brown hairs, resembling Jessica's. The hairs were sent for testing, but initial results only showed possible similarity, not enough for a definitive conclusion. Tensions in the community exploded. One side believed the police were smearing a beloved teacher. Others felt a terrifying truth was finally emerging. Students at the school were divided. Some swore he'd never harm anyone, while others admitted to long feeling uneasy but staying silent. Under pressure, Miller went on local TV, declaring, "I'm innocent. I've never done anything to hurt Jessica or any student. But his confidence only deepened the divide. Some saw it as a bold stand, others viewed it as the polished defense of a man cornered. In press briefings, the Cass County Sheriff's Office was cautious, not naming Miller an official suspect, but emphasizing that everyone near the scene at key times is being thoroughly investigated. For a peaceful town like Harrisonville, this was a heavy blow. People started locking their doors more carefully, trusting neighbors less, and parents restricted their daughters from going out at night. But amid the wave of suspicion and anger, one major question remained unanswered. What did Coach Miller's unaccounted hour conceal? And if not him, who used the cover of that September 14th night to make Jessica Harper disappear from Harrisonville forever? As the Cass County Sheriff's Office grappled with contradictions in Coach Miller's story, a flood of new information suddenly shifted the investigation in an entirely new direction. A middle-aged man, a familiar fisherman at Blue Springs Lake, walked into the station and reported that on the evening of September 14th, while packing up his gear around 10 p.m., he briefly saw a young girl walking with a tall man on a trail near the water's edge. He wasn't certain it was Jessica, but his description of long, dark brown hair and a red shirt matched eerily with what she wore in the library's final footage. The man with her was described as tall, wearing a dark jacket, walking hurriedly. Police immediately focused on this detail. But before they could analyze it, another witness came forward with a completely conflicting account. A woman living near the park swore she saw Jessica walking with a long-haired woman, slim, in her 30s. She was certain because her car passed slowly, its headlights catching the two figures, and Jessica looked panicked, as if being pulled along. Two witnesses, two contradictory images, a tall man and a long-haired woman. Both insisted they were certain. This contradiction sparked a flurry of rumors in the town. People speculated Jessica might have been lured by a couple, a common tactic in human trafficking, where a woman builds trust before a man takes control. Local papers began using the term human trafficking, turning Jessica's disappearance from a personal tragedy into a community-wide fear. Parents panicked, banning daughters from evening classes. Posters warning of trafficking rings plastered markets and gas stations. At community meetings, people shared stories of seeing strange cars near the high school or unfamiliar men approaching their daughters at the mall. Though unverified, the atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia spread rapidly. For police, this new lead both opened possibilities and complicated their work. If a couple had lured Jessica, tracking them would be far more complex than pursuing a single suspect. They began working with federal agents, reviewing files on trafficking rings operating along Interstate 70, just miles from Harrisonville. But the deeper they dug, the more they realized there was no concrete evidence beyond the conflicting witness accounts. Two witnesses, two stories, both seemingly credible in their own way. Which was the truth? The question made an already complex case even more tangled, and the shadow of suspicion now extended beyond individuals like Kyle Henderson or Coach Miller to a horrifying possibility. Jessica Harper might have fallen into the hands of a human trafficking network right in the heart of Missouri. Just when the conflicting witness accounts made the case more chaotic and every lead seemed to stall, an unexpected break emerged. During a final sweep of Jessica's Chevy Cavalier, stored in the secure lot of the Cass County Sheriff's Office, a young investigator named Mark Holloway noticed something small lodged deep in the passenger seat crevice. Using a flashlight and tweezers, he retrieved it, a silver necklace with a simple shiny heart pendant. When shown to Linda Harper for identification, she nearly collapsed. It was the birthday gift she gave Jessica in June, a necklace her daughter wore almost daily, even while sleeping. This discovery was immediately logged as a critical piece of evidence. It confirmed Jessica was in the car that night and suggested she was forced to leave, abandoning her most cherished possession. Some investigators even speculated the culprit might have left the necklace deliberately to create a false trail. Either way, it was a valuable clue. The necklace was placed in evidence, sealed carefully in a plastic bag, and logged per protocol. But just days later, when the forensic team prepared to analyze fingerprints and DNA on the pendant, they were stunned to find it missing. Records showed the evidence was logged into storage on September 18th, signed by Sergeant O'Donnell, but by September 21st, the sealed bag was empty. No one could explain what happened. The evidence room was shaken. Even the most experienced officers admitted that in their years of service, they'd never seen a critical piece of evidence vanish from what was supposed to be a secure facility. The incident sparked a storm of suspicion. One side believed an insider in the department had deliberately removed the clue. Others thought it was a rare but catastrophic oversight in evidence handling. Either way, the result was devastating. The only physical link to Jessica was gone. Officers from Missouri's cold case unit were called in urgently, debating for hours in the meeting room. One slammed the table. "If we can't keep a necklace safe, how can we convince people we'll find the culprit?" The news leaked fast. The next day, local papers ran bold headlines. "Evidence vanishes in Jessica Harper case. What is Cass County Sheriff's Office hiding?" Overnight, Harrisonville, already steeped in anxiety, was rocked by a wave of outrage. People gossiped everywhere, at church, in coffee shops, in school hallways. Some were convinced the police were protecting someone powerful. Others speculated Kyle Henderson or Coach Miller had connections in the department. A more chilling conspiracy theory suggested Jessica's abductor might be someone in uniform, someone with the opportunity and ability to erase evidence. The Harper family was plunged into despair. Linda sobbed upon hearing the news. "It wasn't just evidence, it was a piece of her. Now even the last thing we had is gone." Robert said less, but at a community meeting, he suddenly stood, slamming his hand on the wooden table, his eyes blazing. "If the police can't even keep my daughter's necklace, how can we trust them to find her killer?" His words rang like a death knell for the community's already fragile trust. To calm the public, the Cass County Sheriff's Office was forced to call in Missouri state investigators. An independent team reviewed the entire evidence handling process. The list of those with access to the evidence room was scrutinized. Only 12 names, including the chief, a few senior officers, and forensic technicians. Each person's background was checked. Every shift cross-referenced with security footage. Ironically, the footage from September 18th to 21 was corrupted, too blurry to identify anyone entering or leaving. This coincidence only fueled beliefs that someone had deliberately interfered within the department. The atmosphere was suffocating. Colleagues began eyeing each other with suspicion. Some veteran officers whispered that this could be a strike from the perpetrator, someone who knew the system's workings. A younger officer muttered, "If someone inside is involved, we're fighting an enemy in our own house." Community trust eroded daily. Parents stopped letting daughters stay at school past 5 p.m. People avoided mentioning Jessica's name in public, fearing entanglement in suspicion. Church bulletin boards carried prayers for the Harpers, but also notes blaming the police. For Linda and Robert, the pain was now layered with rage. They began considering hiring a private investigator, seeking answers themselves rather than relying on the system. To them, the necklace's disappearance wasn't just a failure of evidence management, it was a cold reminder that justice for Jessica might have been twisted right inside the evidence room. From that moment, Linda knew that if she kept waiting, her daughter's case would soon be labeled a cold case and forgotten. In a night of desperation, she contacted a private investigator in Kansas City named Raymond Cole, a former detective who'd gone independent. Raymond was a quiet man with sharp gray eyes and a notebook full of meticulous notes. He arrived in Harrisonville days later, and in their first meeting, he said bluntly, "If we want the truth, we have to dig into what the police overlooked or didn't want to see." Linda nodded, tears streaming, but her eyes lit up for the first time since Jessica vanished. Raymond started by meeting Jessica's friends and teachers, combing through every detail. A girl from the library study group recalled Jessica seeming anxious before leaving, constantly looking around as if afraid someone was watching. Raymond noted this carefully, then expanded his questions to the days before her disappearance. Surprisingly, A younger student mentioned seeing a middle-aged man near the school parking lot multiple times, seemingly watching Jessica. At first, everyone assumed he was a parent waiting for a child, but his frequent appearances raised suspicions among some kids. Raymond followed this lead, noting the description: a thin man with graying hair, often wearing a long-sleeved shirt, and notably carrying a small Bible. When he shared this with Linda, a chill ran down her spine. The description closely matched Pastor Daniel Whitaker, the minister who led the church the Harpers attended every Sunday. In Linda's memory, Whitaker was kind, with a warm voice, comforting the family in the early days of Jessica's disappearance. He stood by an empty casket at her prayer service saying, "God will guide us to the truth." Yet now, the student's account painted a starkly different picture. A man silently watching her daughter for weeks. Raymond didn't rush to conclusions. He attended a church service, sitting in the back row, observing Whitaker's every move. The pastor maintained his dignified demeanor, his smile gentle, but his glinting eyes held something elusive. As the service ended, Raymond saw him chatting with parishioners and jotted in his notebook, "Perfect exterior. But if he was the one near the school, everything we've believed is wrong." Linda, hearing his report, sat frozen. The church, once her sanctuary, now felt like a place to question. A painful thought gripped her: could the person stalking Jessica have been the man the entire community knelt to hear every Sunday? After Raymond Cole raised suspicions about Pastor Whitaker, the Harpers clung to a faint hope that the investigation would take a new turn. But everything seemed to stall. Vague witness accounts, missing evidence, and a divided public slowly buried the case in a spiral of dead ends. In 2005, after 4 years with no progress, the Cass County Sheriff's Office officially classified Jessica Harper's disappearance as a cold case. It was a gut-wrenching moment for Harrisonville. Time seemed frozen since that September night in 2001. But on paper, the case was now just a file in a steel cabinet. The Harpers wept at the news, Linda nearly collapsing, while Robert stood statue-like, his eyes hollow. That same year, the case was handed to Detective Mark Reynolds, a seasoned investigator with Missouri's Cold Case Unit. Known for his patience and knack for revisiting overlooked details, Reynolds took the thick file on Jessica with a heavy gaze, as if sensing it wasn't just another case, but a moral burden he'd carry. In his first days, Reynolds spent hours in the records room, poring over every report, every statement, from the initial notes about the Cavalier by the lake to the conflicting witness accounts of a tall man and a long-haired woman. He took meticulous notes, cross-referencing times and evidence. But then, a detail sent a chill down his spine. In the original crime scene map, drawn the night Jessica's car was found, a red circle marked a spot about 200 meters from the parking lot, near a trail into the woods. A faint note beside it seemed to read cloth or mud print, but in the official archived copy, that circle was crossed out in thick black ink, with no note remaining. Reynolds flipped back and forth, comparing handwriting and signatures. The black crossout was clearly in different ink from the original notes, and no technician's name verified the change. Who altered this file? Reynolds muttered, scrawling the question boldly in his notebook. To him, this was no innocent mistake. A key detail from the initial scene had been deliberately erased. But by whom and why? If it was real evidence, a cloth, a mud print, or something else, its removal from the file meant someone wanted to hide the truth from day one. Reynolds raised the issue with his unit chief, but got only shrugs. Maybe a technician's error, maybe a mislabel. Unsatisfied, he knew that in cases like this, the smallest detail could mean everything. Yet this one had been buried by a single pen stroke. In the following weeks, Reynolds met the Harpers. Sitting across from Linda and Robert, he nodded gently. "I won't promise a quick resolution, but I promise this case won't fade into oblivion." Linda cried, and Robert gripped his hand tightly, clinging to a fragile hope. As he left the Harpers' home that night, Reynolds looked up at Missouri's dark sky, knowing he was entering a maze not just of elusive truths, but of invisible walls built by human hands. The hands that crossed out that red circle on the map from that fateful night. From that moment, he understood that to find justice for Jessica Harper, he'd have to confront not only the culprit out there, but the shadows within the very system he served. The case's cold case status left not only the Harpers, but all of Harrisonville in a state of disillusionment. As months passed, Jessica Harper, once the girl the community searched for tirelessly, became a name tied to whispers. People began crafting theories to fill the void the police couldn't explain. At the Main Street coffee shop, some women murmured that Jessica must have had a secret boyfriend, not Kyle Henderson, and perhaps she ran off with him that night. They pointed to her strained smile in her final days at school, her furtive glances in the hallways, concluding she was probably tired of this small town. The theory spread quickly, deepening the Harpers' pain. Linda repeatedly faced neighbors asking bluntly, could she have just run away? A question that cut into her heart like a blade. Meanwhile, another rumor quietly spread that Jessica was involved with drugs. People pointed to a few classmates caught using marijuana, then cast that dark shadow onto Jessica. She was such a good student, probably wanted to let loose sometimes, a man at a bar remarked, prompting nods from others. This baseless rumor quickly became an excuse for some to dismiss the case, viewing Jessica's disappearance as the price of bad choices they believed she made. The Harper family was furious. Robert nearly got into fights when he heard anyone suggest his daughter wasn't as innocent as people thought. While the public was swept up in these ugly theories, Detective Mark Reynolds doggedly reviewed the case file. He knew rumors sometimes reflected a community's desperation, but could also obscure real clues. Then, just when things seemed to quiet down, an anonymous envelope arrived at the Cass County Sheriff's Office, addressed simply, for Reynolds. Inside was a photocopied sheet with rough typewritten text, a bold line reading, "Look underground, not on the lake." The cryptic message stunned Reynolds. For 4 years, police had focused most resources on searching Blue Springs Lake and its surrounding waters, using divers and sonar, but no one had prioritized digging deep into the earth, along the trails, or in the dense nearby forest. Look underground. Did it mean Jessica's body was buried from the start, or was this a cruel game by someone mocking the police's failure? Reynolds kept the letter secret, not sharing it with the press, only logging it in a confidential file. He realized that if it truly came from the perpetrator, it was a sign they were still watching, still controlling the narrative from the shadows. And while Harrisonville remained divided by dark rumors, the Jessica Harper case veered into yet another murky direction, one that perhaps from the beginning, everyone had overlooked. For years, the anonymous letter with its chilling words, "Look underground, not on the lake," haunted Detective Mark Reynolds. He proposed multiple searches around Harrisonville's forests and Lake Giacomo, but limited budgets and community exhaustion led to only superficial efforts. The Jessica Harper case faded into the shadows, becoming a bitter memory in the cold case files. Then, on a foggy November morning in 2019, nearly 2 decades after Jessica vanished, fate finally revealed part of the truth. That day, 2 deer hunters, Paul Jenkins and Eddie Monroe, were trekking through the dense woods near Lake Giacomo, just miles from Blue Springs Lake. The bare trees rustled in the cold wind. While tracking deer prints, Paul tripped over something hard beneath the leaf litter. Brushing away moss, he froze. A long grayish-white bone protruded from the ground. Eddie called 911, his voice trembling with fear. Within an hour, Jackson County Police arrived, cordoning off the area. Forensic technicians began excavating, slowly uncovering a skeleton. Tattered fabric clung to the bones. A shredded red jacket caked in mud, and faded Converse sneakers still intact. When the news broke, Detective Reynolds, who had pursued Jessica's case for nearly 15 years, rushed to the scene. He stood silently, his chest tightening. Everything matched the 2001 reports. Jessica Harper had been found, but only as a pile of bones. Harrisonville reeled at the news. The townsfolk who once whispered that Jessica had run away, gotten involved with drugs, or been trafficked now, realized she never left Missouri. She had been buried in a familiar forest, walked past countless times, unbeknownst to them. Linda Harper fainted when police called. Robert steadied his wife, his eyes red, but his voice steady. At least we've found her, but the scene held more than Jessica's remains. During the excavation, a metallic glint emerged from the soil, a men's silver ring, rough in design, with AC faintly engraved inside. The ring sparked immediate debate. Did the killer carelessly drop it while burying the body, or was it evidence of an accomplice? Some officers suggested it might belong to Jessica, a keepsake. But Linda insisted her daughter never wore rings, especially not one marked AC. Reynolds stood quietly, staring at the ring in its clear evidence bag. A familiar name surfaced in his mind: Arthur Coleman, a suspect from 2001, cleared by an alibi. The initials, AC, were chillingly close, though not yet proof of guilt. He wrote boldly in his notebook, "Ring likely male. Check all suspects with initials AC." The excavation continued for 2 days. Beyond the bones and ring, police found plastic fragments and rotted rope. It seemed Jessica was buried hastily, yet sloppily enough for nature to reveal the truth after nearly 2 decades. Lake Giacomo's forest became a crime scene, and media swarmed. Local TV stations set up cameras, reporters' voices breaking, "Harrisonville finally has answers, but the most painful kind." The Harpers were brought to the forensic center to view the evidence. Linda sobbed seeing the tattered red jacket, a gift she'd saved up to buy for Jessica. Robert stood beside her, hands clenched, silent. The sight hushed the entire investigation room, leaving only the scratch of pens on paper. In press briefings, police confirmed the remains near Lake Giacomo matched Jessica Harper's description. Forensic tests would verify DNA, but all signs pointed to her 2001 disappearance now being a murder case. The men's ring raised an even darker question. Did Jessica face not one killer, but a pair of hands in the dark? Reynolds knew the investigation had entered a new phase. The body was found, but justice for Jessica was still distant. The AC ring was both a clue and a challenge. The killer, or killers, thought they could bury her forever. But Missouri's soil had given up its secret, and this time, Reynolds vowed the truth wouldn't be crossed out of the files again. The remains found in the woods near Lake Giacomo were sent to the Missouri State Highway Patrol's forensic lab. Brittle bones, strands of dark brown hair matted in damp soil, and the tattered red jacket became critical evidence. Technicians began meticulous work, sampling teeth and femur bones, comparing them to Linda and Robert Harper's DNA, stored since Jessica's disappearance. The process took weeks, but the results came through. The genetic markers matched perfectly. The remains were Jessica Harper's. When police informed the Harpers, they nearly broke. 18 years of hope, 18 years of prayers, and their worst fear was now reality. Linda collapsed, clutching a chair as if holding on to her last breath. Robert stood by, face taut, eyes shut, voice hoarse. At least we've found her." His words comforted no one but were his only way to cling to strength amid the pain. The news silenced Harrisonville. Many left white flowers at the Harpers' doorstep. At the church bulletin board, Pastor Whitaker, once a suspect, posted, "God has brought Jessica home." But to some, the words offered no peace, only stirring unresolved suspicions. As the family grieved, the forensic team probed the remains and decayed clothing. Jessica's red jacket was analyzed with modern techniques, extracting DNA from bloodstains and skin cells on the fabric. The initial results were stunning. Besides Jessica's DNA, there was a male's. Crucially, it didn't match samples from Kyle Henderson or Coach Miller, the two heavily investigated suspects from 2001. This shattered old theories. The two men, burdened by suspicion for nearly 2 decades, were partially cleared, but it opened a terrifying void. Whose DNA was it? Reynolds reviewed the report, brows furrowed. In his notebook, he crossed out Kyle and Miller's names, circling male DNA unknown, jacket. He knew this finding wasn't just about narrowing suspects. It showed the investigation had been misdirected from the start. All the accusing glares, all the blame aimed at Kyle or Miller, now proved the danger of rumors and early sloppiness. Reynolds quietly told himself, "We lost so many years looking the wrong way." In a press conference, police announced the DNA results, confirming the remains as Jessica Harper's. They stated the case was now a homicide investigation. Reporters pressed about the unknown DNA. The spokesperson replied vaguely, "We're actively cross-referencing with national databases," but the public wasn't satisfied. Major papers ran headlines. "Mystery DNA on jacket, who is the real killer?" The Harpers, hearing of the unknown DNA, trembled with both fear and renewed hope. Linda whispered, "If that DNA leads to the killer, Jessica might finally get justice." But she also knew the journey would be long and painful. Robert was quieter, sitting in the garage each night, staring at his daughter's old car, as if seeking answers in silence. In Missouri's shadows, a truth was emerging. The red jacket wasn't just evidence of death, but Jessica's final message. Its frayed threads and dried blood held traces of the one who took her life. Not Kyle. Not Coach Miller. Another man, still hidden. And that was the clue Reynolds resolved to pursue, determined to bring the killer to justice after nearly 2 decades. When the jacket's DNA pointed to an unknown man, not Kyle or Coach Miller, Detective Mark Reynolds knew it was time to shed old assumptions and re-examine the case from scratch. He spread out the original suspect list, names scribbled nearly 20 years ago, some dismissed for insufficient evidence, others cleared by alibis. This time, Reynolds scrutinized every detail. One name stood out, Arthur Coleman. Coleman was a mechanic from Independence, not far from Harrisonville. In 2001, he was briefly a suspect because he owned a red pickup truck, matching a witness's description of a vehicle near Blue Springs Lake the night Jessica vanished. Back then, police questioned him. He was cooperative, claiming he was home with his brother, watching football on September 14, 2001. His brother, Andrew Coleman, signed a statement confirming Arthur never left the house. That alibi cleared him, and the case drifted elsewhere. But Reynolds sensed something off. Reviewing the interrogation notes, he noticed Arthur's vague answers, unable to recall details of the game, repeatedly saying, "I was home. Andrew saw me." In his notebook, Reynolds wrote boldly, "Alibi 100% reliant on brother." He checked Arthur's work records from the time. Sure enough, Coleman took a sick day on September 14th, citing the flu. The coincidence of his absence and Jessica's disappearance, paired with a flimsy alibi, fueled Reynolds' suspicions. He visited Andrew Coleman, now in his 30s, living quietly in a rundown suburban house. The meeting was tense. At first, Andrew stuck to the old story. "That night, my brother was home with me watching football," but when Reynolds presented the TV schedule and asked specifics about the game or goals, Andrew faltered. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and after a few probing questions, he blurted, I just said what Arthur told me to. I don't remember anything about that night." The confession cut through Arthur's alibi like a knife, dismantling the facade he'd hidden behind for nearly 2 decades. Reynolds' heart raced. He'd finally cracked a chink in the wall of lies. He documented carefully and left the house in heavy silence. In his mind, Arthur Coleman was no longer just a potential suspect, but a key piece possibly tied to the unknown DNA on Jessica's jacket and the AC ring by her remains. Reynolds sat in his car, flipping through his notebook. He drew a large circle around Coleman's name, underlining it repeatedly as if to burn it into memory. The 2001 alibi was clearly a sham propped up by family loyalty, and the truth of that fateful night remained in the dark. This time, Reynolds vowed it wouldn't escape again. After Andrew Coleman admitted the 2001 alibi was fabricated to protect his brother, Detective Mark, Reynolds knew he had to dig deep into Arthur Coleman's past. His file was pulled from Jackson County's archives, each page chilling Reynolds to the bone. In 1998, a 15-year-old girl accused Coleman of harassment at a supermarket parking lot, claiming he made lewd comments and touched her shoulder. Her family initially pursued the case, but it was dropped due to lack of witnesses and community pressure to avoid making a fuss. Coleman escaped with a verbal warning. It wasn't an isolated incident. A 1999 report noted a woman in a park calling 911 after a man in a red pickup followed her for several loops. The description matched Coleman, but police lacked evidence to charge him. Together, these incidents painted a picture of a persistent predator hiding under the guise of a quiet mechanic. Most striking was Coleman's address. He lived in an old house just 10 miles from Blue Springs Lake, along the route to the forest where Jessica's body was found. Reynolds drove there, stopping before the faded, peeling house with an open garage cluttered with car parts. Neighbors described Coleman as quiet, always tinkering with cars, but whispered he often stared at young girls passing by. Reynolds knocked, but Coleman refused to cooperate, dismissing it as old news. This only fueled Reynolds' resolve to obtain a search warrant. When it was granted, the team swept the garage, checking every corner. There, they found something chilling: a stack of old newspapers, neatly folded and sealed in plastic to prevent dampness. The top page, from September 2001, bore the headline, "17-year-old Jessica Harper missing, police search urgently." The paper, preserved for nearly 20 years, was carefully creased at sections mentioning the Chevy Cavalier and Jessica's photo. Reynolds held the paper, his eyes darkening. This wasn't the act of someone keeping a casual memento, but an obsession. Who preserves a newspaper so meticulously, sealed against moisture? It suggested a sick fixation. Coleman never stopped thinking about the disappearance, cherishing it like a trophy. When technicians seized the papers, Linda Harper was shown photos. She broke into sobs. "For 20 years, he lived nearby, holding my daughter's picture, and no one knew." Andrew's confession, Coleman's history of harassment allegations, and the chilling find in the garage transformed Arthur Coleman from an overlooked name to the prime suspect. In his report to the prosecutor's office, Reynolds wrote clearly, "Coleman not only had motive and opportunity, but shows signs of pathological obsession with the victim. Indirect evidence is more than sufficient to proceed with DNA testing." Leaving the house, Reynolds glanced back at the garage. He knew he'd pulled back a curtain hiding nearly 2 decades of truth. Arthur Coleman was no longer the quiet mechanic in neighbors' eyes, but the shadow haunting Harrisonville for 18 years. After finding the old newspapers in Coleman's garage, Detective Mark Reynolds knew he was close to the truth. But he also understood that psychological evidence and contradictory statements weren't enough to bring Coleman to court. He needed undeniable physical proof tying Coleman to the night Jessica vanished. And Reynolds recalled the detail that had haunted him since taking the case: the small blood stain on the Chevy Cavalier's gearshift. In 2001, the blood sample was too small for comprehensive analysis, and DNA technology wasn't advanced enough. The sample had been stored in a specialized evidence refrigerator, sealed in a tiny vial, like a forgotten memory. Reynolds requested its release, sending it to the Missouri State Highway Patrol's modern crime lab with cutting-edge DNA analysis. Technicians spent weeks extracting, amplifying, and comparing it to databases. Reynolds waited tensely, jumping at every office call. Then, one morning in early 2020, the phone rang. The forensic expert's voice was brief but clear. "We have a match. The blood in Jessica Harper's car is a 100% match to Arthur Coleman." Reynolds sat motionless, his pen slipping from his hand. After nearly 20 years, he had his moment, a direct link tying Arthur to the car, to the scene where Jessica disappeared. No room for excuses, no shield of a false alibi from his brother. But that excitement was quickly overshadowed by another detail in the report. During analysis, technicians discovered a second DNA trace mixed in the sample, not belonging to Jessica or Coleman. It came from another unidentified man, not matching any profile in the National CODIS database. This finding opened a chilling possibility. Coleman didn't act alone. He may have had an accomplice that night, someone who helped him take Jessica to Lake Giacomo, buried her body, and vanished for 2 decades, leaving only faint DNA traces. Reynolds held the report, his heart racing. He wrote in his notebook, Coleman == confirmed. DNA #2 == who, possible accomplice, possible witness. This made the case no longer a simple confrontation with one killer, but unveiled a mysterious network. If there was an accomplice, how had they lived for 18 years? Were they still in Harrisonville, shopping, attending church, blending into the community, or had they left Missouri, carrying a deadly secret? In an urgent meeting, Reynolds presented the findings to the Jackson County prosecutor. He placed the thick file on the table, his voice steady. "We have Coleman's DNA in the car. It's direct evidence, no more doubts." The prosecutor nodded, but looked concerned when mentioning the second DNA. "If there's an accomplice, we need to be careful. The jury will want to know why another person's DNA was at the scene." Reynolds understood, but believed the only path forward was to focus on Coleman and trace the second individual from there. The Harper family was informed. Linda broke down, whispering through tears. Finally, some justice. Robert, still heavy with grief, nodded. "At least now we know his name." But when Reynolds explained the second DNA, the room fell silent. Linda murmured, "So, there's still someone out there, someone who knows." The dread settled over them, heavier than before. In the days that followed, Reynolds didn't take his eyes off the crime scene map on his office wall. The arrows and red markers now centered on Coleman, but in the corner, he drew a large circle, DNA unknown male, accomplice. It became a shadow haunting him, pushing him to dig deeper. The DNA evidence had dismantled Coleman's every excuse, but it also opened a door to a darker truth. Jessica Harper's case might not involve just one pair of hands, and Detective Mark Reynolds knew that while one monster had been exposed, the other would not easily step into the light. The fight for justice had only just begun. The DNA result from the blood in the Chevy Cavalier made Arthur Coleman the prime suspect, but Detective Mark Reynolds knew that to secure an arrest warrant, he needed one final confirmation. A jury and prosecutor wouldn't accept a decades-old blood sample alone. They needed fresh, indisputable evidence. So a covert surveillance operation was launched around Coleman's home. A team of detectives staked out for days, tracking every minor habit. Coleman remained a solitary man, fixing cars in his garage by day, drinking beer at a bar by night, and returning late. Occasionally, he smoked cigarettes, a seemingly trivial habit that became pivotal. One night in March 2021, when Coleman tossed a Budweiser can and a Marlboro cigarette butt into the trash outside his house, the surveillance team sprang into action. They waited until he turned off his lights to sleep, then quietly approached, collecting the entire trash bag. Those seemingly worthless items were sealed on-site and rushed to the forensic lab. There, technicians extracted DNA from saliva on the cigarette butt and dried beer residue in the can. When the results came back, there was no room for doubt. The DNA from the trash matched the blood in Jessica Harper's car 100%. Reynolds held the report, feeling a weight lift after nearly 20 years of pursuit. All the theories, sleepless nights poring over files, and unanswered questions had converged on one clear answer. Arthur Coleman was in Jessica's car on the night of September 14, 2001. Now, justice had a solid foundation to stand on. He promptly drafted a report for the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office. The arrest warrant was prepared with tension but resolve. A plan was swiftly drawn. Apprehend Coleman at his home in the early morning when he was least alert to avoid endangering the community. As Reynolds signed the warrant, he knew the long road to justice for Jessica Harper had reached a critical moment. In his eyes was not just relief, but a burning determination. No matter how much darkness loomed, this time the culprit wouldn't escape. At dawn on a July morning in 2021, the quiet street in Independence, Missouri, erupted with the wail of sirens and flashing red and blue lights. The Jackson County SWAT team, alongside Detective Mark Reynolds, surrounded Arthur Coleman's weathered house, the man who'd lived nearly 2 decades as a harmless mechanic. The warrant was signed the night before, and now justice was no longer a distant concept, but stood at his door. As the wooden door was pounded and a megaphone blared, "Arthur Coleman, we have a warrant. Come out now." The neighborhood awoke. Coleman emerged, his gray hair disheveled, wearing a grease-stained tank top. He stammered, "What's this about?" but was cuffed and escorted to a patrol car before he could react. Neighbors gathered, faces stunned. A woman gasped, "No way. He fixed my car for free." Another man shook his head. "Arthur? That quiet guy? Unbelievable." To neighbors, Coleman was reserved but helpful, sometimes sharing vegetables from his backyard garden. That kindly image crumbled in an instant, replaced by the face of a murder suspect in handcuffs. While chaos unfolded outside, forensic technicians searched Coleman's house. The garage was cluttered with car parts, oil, and stacked old tires. But in a small back room, they found something that silenced the team, an old wooden box on a high shelf, secured with a rusted lock. When pried open, it revealed a bizarre collection, yellowed newspaper clippings, all about Jessica Harper's disappearance. Articles and photos of Jessica were neatly cut and layered, some folded precisely at mentions of the Chevy Cavalier. At the bottom was an enlarged photo of Jessica smiling at her 2000 high school graduation, its edges worn from being handled too often. Reynolds stood frozen before the box, his hand clenched. He knew this wasn't just evidence of a sick obsession, but the closest thing to a silent confession Coleman could leave. No ordinary person keeps clippings for 20 years. Only a killer would treat them as trophies. He signaled for technicians to seal everything. Anger and relief surged within him. The truth had finally stepped out of the shadows. News of Coleman's arrest spread like lightning. Local TV cut to live footage of him being led away, head bowed, cuffs gleaming in the sunlight. Major papers ran sensational headlines. 2001 cold case finally has suspect. Harrisonville was stunned. Many couldn't believe their friendly neighbor was a monster. But for the Harpers, the moment held different weight after 20 years. Their daughter had a voice. Linda wept, seeing Coleman taken away, while Robert whispered, "Jessica, justice is coming." The arrest wasn't just a legal event, but a spiritual shock to Missouri. People had to face the reality that a killer could hide among them, drinking at the same bars, fixing neighbors' cars, and secretly keeping sick mementos of his victim for 2 decades. When the wooden box of clippings came to light, everyone understood that Jessica Harper's case never left Arthur Coleman's mind. He had nurtured it daily, like a twisted obsession. At the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, Arthur Coleman was brought to a cramped interrogation room with cold gray walls, a metal table, and a ceiling-mounted camera. Detective Mark Reynolds sat across from him, eyes resolute. This was the moment he'd waited nearly 20 years for, but he knew he had to be meticulous. Coleman was a stubborn loner, whose habit of silence could make him a tough opponent in this mental duel. From the start, Coleman denied everything. "Arms crossed," he said evenly. "I didn't do anything wrong. She got in my car willingly." Reynolds tilted his head, asking slowly, "So you admit you saw Jessica that night?" Coleman hesitated, then backtracked, "No, I don't know Jessica. I meant in general." His contradictions began to show. Later, when Reynolds showed a photo of the Chevy Cavalier with the blood stain on the gearshift, Coleman frowned. "Okay, maybe I gave her a ride once, but that doesn't mean I hurt her." Reynolds let him trip over his own words. He quietly flipped through the file, reading from the DNA report. "The blood in the car matches Arthur Coleman." Then he slid the yellowed newspaper clippings from the garage across the table. "Why keep these for 20 years? Coleman squinted, forcing a weak smile. "Just curious. Everyone reads papers." But his hands shook, his index finger tapping nervously on the table. Reynolds didn't rush, letting the silence stretch until Coleman grew restless and broke it himself. He spoke rapidly. "Look, I might have given her a ride, but she wanted it. She said she wanted to get out of this town. I just helped." Again, his story contradicted his earlier "I don't know Jessica" claim from minutes before. The camera captured every inconsistency, each one tightening the noose around him. The turning point came when Reynolds placed a photo of Jessica's tattered red jacket, found with her remains, on the table. He stared into Coleman's eyes, saying nothing. The air grew thick. Coleman swallowed hard, then blurted a sentence that would later become a fatal blow in the case file. She didn't deserve to die. Reynolds stopped writing, looking up. "What did you just say?" Coleman paled, trying to backpedal. "I mean, I heard people say that. That's not what I meant," but it was too late. His unguarded words were an indirect admission that he was present when Jessica died or caused her death. In the observation room, the prosecutor and other officers exchanged glances, holding their breath. They knew that single slip was enough for the public to see who Coleman was, and with the matching DNA, the case was nearly airtight. The interrogation stretched for hours. Coleman alternated between defiance, "There's no evidence," and pleading, "I didn't mean to hurt her." His wavering between denial and partial admission only strengthened the belief he was hiding the truth. Reynolds gathered his files, stood, and left with one final remark. "You're right. Jessica didn't deserve to die, and we'll make sure everyone knows who took her away." The door slammed shut, leaving Coleman alone in the gray room, sweat soaking his shirt. He could deny and deflect, but the camera had captured it all, from blatant contradictions to the damning slip. She didn't deserve to die. For Reynolds, it was a silent confession, a critical link for the upcoming courtroom battle. Just when it seemed all pieces were falling into place after Coleman's interrogation, the Jackson County investigative team was haunted by one lingering question: whose was the second DNA sample from Jessica Harper's tattered jacket? In early 2022, the Missouri State Lab completed its analysis, and the results stunned the team. It matched perfectly with Rick Saunders, a 43-year-old drinking buddy of Coleman's, a regular at seedy bars around Independence. The information was immediately relayed to Detective Reynolds. He realized that if Rick was involved, the case could be far more complex than Coleman acting alone. Rick was summoned for a separate interrogation. At first, he was nonchalant, even smirking. "DNA, I probably touched something. Who remembers 20 years ago?" But before him was a thick report with undeniable evidence. Blood, hair, and DNA on Jessica's jacket matched him. Reynolds lowered his voice, each word heavy. "Rick, you can't claim you accidentally left DNA on a dead girl's body from 20 years ago." After hours of evasion, Rick began to sweat. Finally, he bowed his head, voice hoarse. "Okay, I'll talk, but you have to believe me, I didn't kill that girl." He confessed that on the night of September 14, 2001, Coleman called him in a panic, telling him to come to Blue Springs Lake immediately. When Rick arrived, he saw Coleman trembling beside the Chevy Cavalier, the driver's seat bloodied, and Jessica's motionless body in the back. "I wanted to leave, but Coleman held a knife to me, saying if I didn't help, I'd end up next to her. I was terrified. So I helped him drag the body into the woods and leave it." The confession hushed the interrogation room. Reynolds pressed, "You're sure you only moved the body, nothing else?" Rick trembled. "I swear I didn't touch her. I only helped because I was scared for my life." He added that Coleman wrote the "see you soon" note to stage a story that Jessica had a rendezvous. Rick claimed he never dared mention it again, drinking to forget, but the guilt haunted him for 2 decades. Though his story seemed plausible, prosecutors weren't convinced. They questioned, if Rick only helped, why was his DNA on multiple parts of Jessica's jacket? If he only moved the body, why didn't he report it afterward? And why stay silent for 20 years? These questions kept Rick a potential suspect in the public's eyes, despite his partial confession. News of the second DNA spread, shocking Harrisonville. People speculated it wasn't just a lone murder, but a collaboration between drinking buddies. Some even claimed to have seen Coleman and Rick with Jessica at a fast food joint weeks before her disappearance, though no one reported it, assuming it was a casual chat. In press briefings, prosecutors were cautious. They confirmed Coleman as the primary perpetrator, with undeniable evidence against him, but they also acknowledged that Rick Saunders' role in the case is under review. Investigators worked to reconstruct the timeline, cross-referencing Rick's confession with old case files. Indeed, in 2001, Rick was briefly questioned as Coleman's friend, but provided a vague alibi, claiming he was drinking at a bar, and police didn't probe further. Now, with clear DNA evidence, that alibi was completely debunked. A major twist emerged when prosecutors revealed internally that despite Rick's DNA, they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him with murder. The reason, no direct witnesses or physical proof tied him to the attack. All they had was his confession of helping move the body, a crime, but not enough to make him the primary killer. Rushing to charge him risked collapsing the case in court. Reynolds felt frustrated, but understood the law's limits. He told himself, Rick may not have struck the blow, but he knows more than he's saying. Deep down, he suspected Rick could have been an accomplice from the start, or at minimum, stood by as Coleman acted. For Jessica, the innocent 17-year-old in 2001, facing two grown men alone, was the most heartbreaking truth. For the Harper family, the second DNA only deepened their wounds. Linda Harper sobbed in an interview, "We want to know everyone who took our daughter's chance to live. Coleman alone, or both of them, they stole our Jessica." The public was divided. Some believed Rick was just a coerced victim. Others saw him as a monster in the shadows. As the case moved to higher authorities, a final decision was made. Coleman would face trial for first-degree murder. Rick Saunders would be investigated for tampering with evidence and desecration of a corpse, but faced no murder charges yet. Legally, he remained in limbo between witness and accomplice. Reynolds ended his report that night with a note, "The case isn't closed. Coleman will face trial." But the mystery of Rick Saunders' true role remains a question hanging over Missouri's sky. The Jackson County, Missouri courtroom in the fall of 2022 was packed with reporters, Harrisonville residents, and law students observing a case deemed a landmark in cold case investigations. 21 years after Jessica Harper vanished, the community finally had a chance to see justice served. At the defendant's stand, Arthur Coleman appeared in an orange jumpsuit, far frailer than the robust mechanic who once intimidated the neighborhood. Yet his eyes held a cold defiance, as if daring the world to believe he still hid secrets. In the front row, Linda and Robert Harper held hands tightly, eyes red but resolute. They had waited 2 decades for this moment. The trial opened with the prosecutor's words, "DNA doesn't lie." He left his mark in the car, on the jacket, and in the shattered heart of a family. We're here today to speak the truth for Jessica Harper, who can no longer defend herself. Forensic evidence was presented layer by layer. The blood sample preserved since 2001 matched Coleman's DNA. 100%, the 2021 beer can and cigarette butt solidified the conclusion, and the box of mementos in his home, filled with articles about Jessica, was an obsessive collection only a killer would keep. The defense attorney tried to counter, arguing the evidence could have been contaminated over time, and that Coleman's newspaper clippings merely reflected a citizen's fascination with a high-profile case. But the defense weakened when the prosecutor played the interrogation recording where Coleman slipped. "She didn't deserve to die." The statement struck the jury like a knife, as it inadvertently admitted he knew Jessica was dead, a detail only the killer could have known in 2001. Rick Saunders also faced court, but as a secondary defendant in a separate hearing. Before facing justice, Rick signed a plea deal, confessing to concealing and moving the body in exchange for a lighter sentence. Called as a witness in Coleman's trial, Rick trembled as he recounted that horrific night. "I saw Arthur by the car, blood everywhere. I was scared to death. He said if I didn't help, I'd end up next to her. I was wrong to stay silent for 20 years. Rick's tears didn't quell the courtroom's anger, but they shed light on part of the truth. The defense tried to pivot. If Rick was there, why not consider him the main perpetrator? The prosecutor countered firmly, "Rick's DNA on the jacket only proves he moved the body. The blood in the car at the driver's seat is Coleman's. No one else can explain that." The jury listened, weighing each word in an atmosphere thick with tears, anger, and unhealed pain. After 3 weeks of trial, dozens of witnesses, experts, and hundreds of pages of documents, the jury deliberated for less than 2 days. On verdict day, the courtroom was so full that extra chairs were set up in the hallway. The judge read aloud. Arthur Coleman was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to life without parole. The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted with relieved sighs, Linda Harper's sobs, and scattered applause from Harrisonville residents who'd waited 2 decades for this day. Coleman said nothing, only offering a faint, enigmatic smile, leaving the question, what else was he hiding? In his separate hearing, Rick Saunders received a 5-year sentence for tampering with evidence and desecration of a corpse, reduced due to his plea deal and time served. As he was led away in cuffs, Rick bowed his head, whispering, "I'm sorry, Jessica." For the Harpers, the apology came too late, but it was at least an acknowledgement. For Harrisonville, Coleman's conviction was a relief, but left a scar for years. The killer lived among them, fixing neighbors' cars for free, chatting at bars. A neighbor said through tears, "I had him change my oil. I never thought a murderer was next door." The story became a lesson in vigilance, that darkness can hide in the most ordinary guise. The Harper family could finally lay flowers on Jessica's grave, believing justice was served. Linda shared in a press conference, "Nothing brings my daughter back, but she hasn't been forgotten. She's remembered, and justice has been done." Yet one question lingered, was Rick truly just coerced? Or did he play a deeper role in the crime? No one could be certain, and perhaps that truth would remain buried in the woods near Lake Giacomo, where Jessica was found after 18 years. But with Coleman's life sentence without parole and Rick's punishment, the Missouri 2001 cold case closed like a long nightmare. It left the community with a wound, but also affirmed the power of persistence, modern forensics, and the belief that justice, however delayed, can find its way back. On a clear spring morning in 2023, sunlight filtered through Harrisonville's Oak Hill Cemetery, where the Harpers had prepared a plot for Jessica. Over 20 years after her disappearance, their 17-year-old daughter finally returned to her mother's embrace in the earth. The funeral was simple but emotional. White roses covered the coffin. Former classmates, now adults, cried seeing Jessica's photo in the graduation gown she never wore. Linda stood by the grave, whispering, "My girl, we found you. Justice has been done for you." Church bells rang in the distance, blending with the wind through old oak trees, a belated farewell, but also a release. The Jessica Harper case became a milestone in Missouri's forensic history, and across the U.S., law and criminology schools used it as a teaching case, showcasing the power of forensic genealogy, DNA combined with genealogical data, that broke a nearly 2-decade silence. But beyond technology, it was a testament to human perseverance. Detective Mark Reynolds, who never shelved the file, the Harpers who tirelessly wrote letters and kept Jessica's name alive in the media. The media called it a story of faith. Faith that no matter how long, justice won't stay buried. Yet alongside the light, shadows remained. The community never fully knew Rick Saunders' true role. Was he merely coerced, or more actively involved? And lingering questions persisted. Why did Coleman keep Jessica's mementos for 20 years? Why was the original case file altered? And who made the silver necklace vanish from the evidence room? These questions hung in the air, a reminder that not every truth is fully revealed. Today, Jessica's grave at Oak Hill Cemetery is adorned with fresh flowers and cards from strangers. "We won't forget you." For Harrisonville, the painful memory became part of its collective history, etching a lesson that even the most peaceful towns can harbor tragedy. For the Harpers, though the loss could never be erased, they knew their efforts brought justice for their daughter. For America, the case was a reminder that truth, however long buried, can find its way back to light, but always with shadows no one can fully explain. The story of Jessica Harper's case in Missouri didn't just end with the convictions of Arthur Coleman and Rick Saunders. It opened reflections for us, Americans today, on safety, trust, and community strength. The discovery of Jessica's Chevy Cavalier, abandoned at Blue Springs Lake, with a small bloodstain and the cryptic "see you soon." Note shows that sometimes the smallest details are the biggest red flags. In modern life, especially for young Americans, noticing warning signs, like Jessica's shared fear of being followed, can prompt early action, like alerting family or authorities instead of dismissing them. The disappearance of the silver necklace from the evidence room reminds us that even the legal system can have flaws, underscoring the importance of transparency and community oversight of public institutions. Detective Reynolds' discovery of the altered crime scene map shows that justice sometimes depends on those who refuse complacency, examining every seemingly trivial detail. Finally, forensic genealogy, which identified Jessica's DNA and matched it to Coleman, proves the power of science in solving cold cases. The lesson is clear: in a complex society, we must trust in scientific progress and the legal system while staying vigilant and caring for one another, so no family has to wait 2 decades for truth about their loved one. If you found the 20-year journey for justice in Jessica Harper's case haunting and meaningful, please subscribe to the channel to catch more cold case stories. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, where we continue uncovering truths hidden behind tragedies time seemed to bury.